Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. In today's video I'm taking the snow globe idea and using it to create a semicircular winter scene with the snow globe effect on the inside. There are many steps to this project, so it's quite a long video, but the finished result really must be seen. So if you don't have time to watch it all, please feel free to skip to the end to have a look, because it really is a must-see to see that beautiful snow falling in the winter scene. So without further ado, grab yourself a drink, get comfy and enjoy the video. Right then, let's get started. The mould I'm using today for my snow scene is a cake mould, a silicone cake mould, which I adapted in another video where I made my clock. It's just got silicone that I've poured into the bottom, but you'd need to see the other video to see exactly how I did that. I'll leave a link in the description. And the resin I'm using today is iCrystal resin from Resin Pro. It's a 2:1 ratio, so it's nice and easy to mix. Once I'd mixed my resin, I separated it into 2 jugs, and in one of them I added some interference blue mica powder from Resin Pro, and in the other one I just used some blue. And the idea was to have kind of 2 different tones mixing together, but yeah, it didn't really work because iCrystal resin is very, very thin, and that's a good thing because, you know, it's a nice bubble-free, clear finish. But because it's so thin and it takes a while to cure, when you're using 2 colours together, they do tend to just blend into each other. But having the interference blue in there did help to give it a more pearlescent effect. So yeah, I'm still glad I did it, but I didn't get the effect I wanted. Now then, I don't know if you can tell, but the base of the mould is uneven, and I could not for the life of me work out what had gone wrong. I felt so silly afterwards. I'll tell you in a moment what happened. But I tried everything to make the bit that was sticking up in the middle go down so it was laid flat on the surface, but it just wasn't having it. And I thought to myself, what on earth? Is it the way I've stored it and it's stretched? I just didn't know. And then about halfway through the project, this is about 2 days later, I realised that I had my mould inside another mould, and I hadn't realised. So there were 2 cake moulds there stacked together for storage, and I hadn't realised. And that's why the mould you can see from the top where you're looking from it at it now, it's all squashed inside another mould, and that's why it didn't lay flat. Oh, I felt so stupid. But I'm sure we all make silly mistakes like that, don't we? So anyway, once I'd realised it was too late, I just kept the 2 moulds together. And in a way it was a good thing because it was nice and sturdy and it gave a lot of support to the sides. But oh, I did feel silly. Right, I'm starting to waffle, so let's get on with the project. The blue's mixed and I'm just going to pour it in and give it a little bit of a mix together and then leave it to cure. That's all I was doing for the first layer. And I'm going to be speeding up a lot of today's video because there's a lot of painting and you don't need me to talk all the way through the painting. I'm going to speed it up and put some music on and just give you some information when it's necessary. Otherwise it will just go on and on and on and on. So yeah, basically each layer was left. Every time I poured resin, I left it to the next day. So it's not a quick project, this one, but it's a very enjoyable one. Right, I decided to try something different in this project. I've got this Sizzix Expand paste, which I used years ago when I used to teach art in schools. I used to do it with the children and they loved it. And I finally managed to find some and buy myself some. to try to make some clouds with it, and it's really cool stuff, and I really wanted to know if it would work well in the resin, and it did. I did a practice piece before doing this just to make sure that it was all right in resin, and it was fine. So I was trying to find the right tool to apply it with. Later in the video you'll see that I just used a paintbrush and it worked a lot better. And it's just a case of adding it a little bit. You don't need much into the shape you want. So I'm just making some cloud shapes with it. And then you use your heat gun, you know, like an embossing gun, nothing too powerful, and heat it up and it all puffs up into like clouds. So I thought it would be perfect for clouds. And so, yeah, I've used that a few times in the video, and now you know what it is. It's Sizzix Expand Paste. I've sped the heating process up because it does take a while to get it hot enough for it to expand, and you don't want to rush it. You need to kind of do it really carefully, because if it comes up too fast, it makes bubbles in a way. It fills with air and it will pop, and you'll have a hole in it. So you do need to be quite careful with it. But I think it works really well for the clouds. I'm using Arctic Blue for the snow, and in fact, I hardly used any white at all in this painting, just for some highlights here and there. And you do need to do it in a few layers. The first layer, it really is to get it stuck to the resin. Once you've got that first layer down, the next layer will paint on top easily. And you can dry it off with your heat gun if you want to be, if you don't want to wait around for it to dry each time. So, yeah, I will put some music on and you can enjoy the painting process. Right, for the snow globe effect, you're going to need a silicone insert so you can make the void for the water and glitter in the middle. So that's what I'm doing now. I've taken a piece of acrylic sheet. It's still got its protective film on so that I'm not going to be damaging it, and I can use it again later on. It just works nicely for making the mould. So if you don't have one, that's fine. You don't have to use an acrylic sheet. You could use anything that's nice and smooth and flat. Even acetate would work. That would work quite well. And the other thing that I found, which I just, how you keep things just because you think they might be useful. I got this stuff when we had a kitchen done a couple of years ago, and it's for edging the edges of wood units, and you iron it on the edges, and it's nice and stiff and shiny. And I thought, oh, that will work perfectly for making the barrier for my silicone. But, obviously, if you don't have that, you can't use that. But it's worth a look in your shed or your garage, because you might have some if you've had a new kitchen put in at any time. If you don't have that, you could use, let me think, vinyl. Maybe vinyl on a long strip of card. It's just got to be fairly sturdy and smooth and shiny and non-porous, and it will work fine. And all I'm doing is gluing it onto the acrylic sheet with some glue gun, making sure I don't leave any gaps for the silicone to leak out. And as you can see, underneath my acrylic sheet, I've just drawn the semicircle, the shape that I wanted it. It's just about 1 centimetre smaller than the mould, around, so there's 1 centimetre clearance all around the curve. Yeah, so that's all I've done, and put it underneath, and then I just stick to that. When I did this, I did it about 2 days before I was going to be using it. The reason I did that is because when you pour silicone, and even when it looks like it's cured, if you use it in resin straight away, you will find that you get lots and lots of micro bubbles coming out of the silicone. So it's best to do it 2 days before you need it, give it time to fully cure, and then your resin will be nice and clear around the edges. So yeah, that's just a little tip. Don't use it straight away. Once you've made your barrier, it's time to add your silicone rubber. Mine is pure mould silicone rubber from Resin Pro. It's a 1:1 ratio, so you just mix the 2 parts together, and then once it's thoroughly mixed, you can pour it in. I really didn't know how much I would need, so I was guessing, but it worked out really well. It turned out to be about 1 centimetre in depth, which was just perfect, really. So once it was poured, I just put it aside for a couple of days to be fully cured. I didn't need to get rid of the bubbles or anything, because this silicone rubber is really good at degassing all by itself. Right back to my snowy landscape scene, and we're on to the next layer now the resin has cured. It's just a case of building up your layers. It can be a little bit tricky because obviously once you've done one layer and covered it in resin, you can't alter it. So you kind of need to plan ahead and have the idea in your head exactly how it's going to be. Mine did change a little bit from what my plan was, but yeah, I kind of made it up as I went along in some respects, but it worked out okay. So I'm just doing the same thing again, and once again I will speed it up and play you some music. Okay, now it's time for the silicone, and it's just a case of taking off the barrier and peeling the silicone off of the acrylic sheet. And there we have it, all ready to go inside the mould. And you've just got to be quite careful to make sure you've got an even space all around the edges. I had to take it out and put it back in again. And as you could see, it really clings to the resin. So you have to pull it out. You can't just slide it around. Pull it out and put it back in. So it's really good that it clings to the resin so nicely, because we need it to. We don't want any resin to escape underneath. So once that was in position, I mixed up some more of the eye crystal resin and poured it around the edges. Do be careful at this stage. I was a little bit heavy-handed with my resin. I poured in a little bit too much and it went over the top of the silicone, so I had to try and clear that up a little bit. But yeah, if you're careful, you'll get it just to fill in the edges without going over the top of the silicone. So anyway, I left it till the next day as usual to cure, and then it was time to take the silicone insert out. It was a little bit tricky. I needed to find something to just lever it out with. I just used some tweezers in the end. I just couldn't get a grip on it, but I levered it out and then it came out absolutely fine. Now then, to make the snow globe effect, what I have here is some acrylic sheet again, the same stuff I made the mould on. It's 1mm thick, which means you can cut it with a craft knife without too much difficulty. I've left the film on. I also made 2 holes in it. You could drill it, or you could do what I did and just use a soldering iron and melt 2 holes in it. I'm using high viscosity UV resin from J Diction to attach it to the resin. You don't have to use high viscosity UV resin. I do prefer it because it's thicker and it stays in position and doesn't go everywhere. But use what you have. I mean, you don't even have to use UV resin if you only have epoxy resin. You can use that. It just means you've got a long time to wait for it to cure. But yeah, you could still do that. So I'm just applying it very carefully. I need to make sure that I don't leave any gaps, because once that acrylic sheet's put on top, you know, you don't want air pockets trapped in there. So yeah, you do need to make sure you've got just enough and not too much and not too little. It's probably the trickiest part of the whole thing is this part, but even saying that, it's not that tricky. Right, at this stage I remembered that I wanted to add my glitter before putting my acrylic sheet on. Really, I should have done that before I put the UV resin on because I didn't want to get glitter trapped on that wet UV resin. But anyway, it was fine. I was just careful. I added 3 teaspoons of glitter. I just went through all my stuff that I had and found, you know, a selection of different ones to try out. I've got some really big chunky glitter from Hemway. I've got my Galaxy glitter from Resin Pro and the shaved ice from, oh, can't remember, but it was called shaved ice. Just to try out some different things. I wasn't really sure what would work best. I have done one snow globe type thing before a long time ago. It was a pyramid one. And I did find that if you use too much of the very fine glitter, that doesn't work very well. So it's best to stay with the chunky stuff if you've got some. And so once the glitter was in, I just carefully placed the acrylic sheet on top and looked around it to check that there were no air pockets trapped. And the reason there's 2 holes in there is because when you add the water, it's much easier when you're adding the water if there's somewhere for the air to come out, that, you know, you're replacing the air in there with water. So if you've only got 1 hole, as you're putting the water in, the air will have nowhere to get out and it will be really hard to put the water in. So make sure it's got 2 holes in. And like I said, I made my 2 holes with my soldering iron. I just I held it out the window and melted it because obviously it's going to make a lot of smoke and smell. But it worked really quickly and easily. Anyway, I'm waffling now. What I'm doing now, before I put it under my UV light, I'm just adding some extra UV resin just around the edges in places where it looked like there was a little bit more needed to seep underneath and join the rest. And then once that's on, it's fully sealed and I can put it under the UV light to cure. I gave it 10 minutes just to make sure it was fully cured. Right, I've got some vegetable glycerine here and I'm using 4 teaspoons full of that with 250 millilitres of distilled water. What the glycerine does is it thickens the water up and it makes the glitter float in the water a lot more slowly. I would actually, if I was doing it again, I would probably put in 5 teaspoons of the glycerine, just because I found that my glitter would have been better if it moved a little bit slower. But you live and you learn, don't you? I'm always saying that. Right, so I gave it a good stir, and then I got a syringe and I just kept filling it with the solution and popping it through the hole and squeezing it in. If you wanted to, if you had one of those little funnels, you might find it easier to use a funnel, because it was a lot of going backwards and forwards, but it didn't take that long really. At least with a syringe you can be a lot more careful with it, and it's quite easy. Just time consuming, that's all. Once I'd finished adding the water, it was time to close the holes, and I'm just using a little bit of clear sticky tape and cutting it as small as I could. Well, not quite as small as I could. It needs to be bigger than the hole, but not too much bigger than the hole. And applying it over the hole, and then using UV resin over the top of that to seal the edges of the tape so no water can escape. And while I'm doing that, I'll just point out, can you see the air that's trapped in there? I knew that was there. I did it deliberately. If you leave a pocket of air in there, as you're turning your snow globe from upside down to the right way up and vice versa, having an air bubble in there helps everything to move up and down. And I'm going to be blocking out the top and the bottom anyway, so you won't see the air bubble. You'll see what I mean soon. Anyway, I'm just adding that little bit of UV resin just to seal the tape, and then we'll be ready to add a layer of epoxy resin over the top and continue the painting process. You might have noticed that now the water and the glycerin is in there and the glitter, that the painting that I have in the background is kind of a little bit fuzzy and out of focus, which, I like it. It looks more like it's in the background. But yeah, at the same time, it's kind of a shame to have lost that detail. So yeah, I think it might have been the glycerin that just fuzzed it a little bit, if you can get what I mean. Right after that layer of resin had cured, I decided to do another layer of clouds with the expand paste. And with hindsight, I wish I hadn't. It was a mistake really, but these mistakes happen, don't they? The thing is with this, like I said before, it's kind of unforgiving, because once you've done it, you can't change your mind. The idea of putting the clouds there in the foreground was to hide the bubble that comes to the top, the air pocket in the water, but also the rim of the cavity which shows up. And my plan was to have the clouds at the top and to have some branches at the side, which I'm going to paint on next, so that it looks like you're looking at the scene through the bushes. That was the idea, and the branches would disguise the edge of the cavity as well. But yeah, I wish I hadn't done the clouds. I'm just not quite keen on those. Anyway, I found a way around it, but first I added another layer of resin and let it cure until the next day. Yep, there's a lot of layers of resin in this, and luckily I'm nice and patient and I'm not in any rush. So once it had cured, it was time for my master plan, which was initially just to disguise the edges of the cavity by adding branches around the two sides. But because I didn't like the clouds, I decided to add branches all the way around to kind of disguise the clouds a little bit. And I think it worked. I did 2 layers of branches just to add some depth. So I will put some music on again and you can see how it went. Okay, the first layer of branches is done and it's time to add my cute little robin, which I printed out from the Canva app on my iPad. I've got the full membership there, so there's a whole range of images that you can print out. And I found this lovely little robin and I printed it onto water slide decal paper for laser printers. My printer's a laser printer, so I don't need to seal it. It won't bleed because it uses toner instead of ink. And I just soaked it in lukewarm water for about 30 seconds and it slides off the backing paper onto your surface. If you don't have a laser printer, just use an inkjet printer, but make sure you get the water slide decal paper for inkjet printers and give it about 3 sprays of varnish. I'm trying to think which varnish I've used for it. I'll try to remember and I'll put a link in the description. But yeah, 3 layers of varnish to make sure that the ink is completely sealed. Or if you know somebody maybe who works in an office with one of those big printer photocopier things, they usually use toner, so get them to copy it for you. Or sometimes you can go into a library and print things out there or photocopy images there, and those are usually laser printers as well. So yeah, there's a few options for that. But yeah, I really like my robin. I think it really brought the whole scene to life. So you need to give it about 3 hours for that water slide decal to completely dry before adding your next layer of resin. So once I'd poured the resin and let it cure, the next day I was ready to paint on the final layer of branches and then add the final layer of resin. So the last layer of resin's applied and now we just need to wait for the next day, for the moment you've all been waiting for, to see the snow scene in action. Well, I know I just said it's time to see it in action, but when I got it out the mould, it was a little bit rough around the edges. So what I did was I quickly got my nail file and just filed the edges and then decided it just looked a little bit unfinished. And then I used my silver pilot marker just to go around the edges, just to finish it off. And then it was ready. And here it is. Isn't that pretty? I think I would like it more if the glitter didn't all come down in one go like it tends to. So I would need to add more glycerin for that. Do you remember at the beginning when I was putting 4 teaspoons in and I said maybe 5? I'm still thinking that might be a good idea. But then again, if it's the glycerin that's made the background a little bit fuzzy, that might be even worse. So I'm not sure what would be the best option there, but still I think it's turned out really pretty. Yeah. Overall I'm happy with it and I'd like to know what you think. So let me know in the comments if you've enjoyed the video, and if you haven't already subscribed and you'd like to, please do, and give it a thumbs up because that really helps the video to carry on getting recommended on YouTube. So that's it for today, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.